We try and follow a standard process when managing our data story projects. We reviewed that process in our last lecture. This process includes some practical steps that help give the project some initial structure, bring the team together, and set the project on a good course. Regardless of whether the project is small or large, we typically implement these initial steps to set up the data story project. They really do help us get organized. So in this lecture, we'll cover off on the more practical steps that you'll want to think about doing for your data story projects. These practical steps will address things like team communication, document collaboration, and code management. Once we started implementing these steps early on in our projects, we found the projects went more smoothly and we could focus more quickly on higher value work. So, let's jump in.
Regardless of whether you're a solo journalist, content creator, or distributed team, an important first step is setting up your data story project. With some upfront planning and setup, you can save yourself time, energy, and money, and set yourself up well for project management, governance, and/or compliance requirements. Keeping and staying organized throughout your data story is important and will lead to a more successful release of your project. Before discussing how and what tools you might use, let's explore some of the reasons why we feel it makes sense to properly set up and structure your project. The first area is organization and accessibility. We've found that the more you have a trusted system and process in place, the more you can spend on higher value work. So, thinking in terms of a system that you and your team can access throughout the process is important, regardless of where they may be located or the needs of that team member. Using a standard process and set of common tools provides a structured way to store, access, and manage documents, data, and code. It also makes it easier for all project members to find and use the resources they need, regardless of their physical location, and communicate with one another. So be sure to think through how you can create a system or structure that works for you and your team. It'll pay dividends. The next consideration is version control. Tracking versions, be it data, documents, code, or other, is super important when creating data stories. Data stories often involve the creation and revision of multiple datasets, scripts, and documents. You can do this manually, but it becomes more time-consuming and error-prone the bigger the project and the more files you're creating. Also, you may need to roll back to previous versions, so not having a process in place to do this quickly could mean work lost and time spent tracking down older versions. If you get into the habit of implementing a good way to manage version control across all of your artifacts, then again, you can always focus on iterating against the latest version of your work. The next consideration is document collaboration, also called document management. We use collaboration because it's not just about managing your documents, but it's also about the communication and partnership around those documents. For team-based projects, you could have multiple people needing access to a document. Thus, document collaboration is another important area to consider when setting up your project. Collaborative tools enable multiple people to work on documents or code simultaneously, and there are plenty of options out there, such as SharePoint, Google Drive, or OneDrive. But try and choose a process and tool that supports your priority features. For example, for us, real-time editing, version control, cloud-based storage, and flexible content management are important. This next consideration is really important: security and permissions. It's a broad consideration that cuts across a lot of what you'll do as an enterprise and within your data story projects. For example, data stories can sometimes involve sensitive information that require careful handling. Be sure to implement a process where your communication is secure and can be encrypted if needed, and your documents and project artifacts are secure. It can also mean you're handling sensitive data, or data with PII in it, which you'll need to keep encrypted and under lock and key. Within your defined process, be sure to have the security protocols and policies clearly defined. For example, assigning and managing permissions, levels of encryption protocol, and so on. The next consideration is scalability and integration. As projects grow, the amount of data and number of files typically increase. It's tough to think through scale when you're first starting out, but try and keep the process simple, documented, and easy to manage when you're first starting out. And as you grow and do more projects, think about ways to automate and create artifacts that are conversant, i.e. easy to integrate with other platforms and projects. You'll recognize them in that you'll be doing the same task over and over again. So once you see yourself repeating a task, be sure to automate it. When done right, you'll free up time, be more focused on the product, and this scalability and integration capability will prevent bottlenecks and maintain efficiency as project demands escalate. The next consideration is backup and recovery. Back in the day, this was about making sure you didn't just have a local copy of your document on your laptop in case Windows crashed and took your work with it. Now, storing and working with or in the cloud is the default. So you can create a project structure that allows you to work locally with a backup in the cloud or work wholesale in the cloud. Further, the range of features for cloud-based tools and platforms is getting better with newer tools, AI automation, workflow management, cross-platform integration, and so on. Document and code management tools automatically back up your data, which protects against data loss due to hardware failures, software issues, or human error. This is critical for maintaining the integrity of your project's data throughout its lifecycle. The next consideration is audit trails and compliance. If you're a solo journalist or content creator, this may not be high on your list. However, depending on the nature of your project, you may need to have an audit trail and have accountability for legal compliance. So even if you're a solo journalist or content creator, plan for growth and build the ability to audit your project artifacts. This will, in the least, give you a place where you can more deeply validate the data, analyses, results, models, and so on. Another key consideration is professionalism and reliability. This is important. Be professional and reliable. Whether you're designing a visualization to tell a story around climate change or working on the next Panama Papers, the end result matters, as do each of the steps along the way to get there. And this extends to how you treat your subject area, your customers, and your audience. All the example considerations listed above will help you design and implement a process for managing your data story projects that works for you and allows you to create an amazing finished product. Now that we've talked through a few key considerations for you to think about when working on your data stories, let's talk now about the specifics of how to set up your data story project. It can be daunting when you first set out to create a data story. What to do first? Where do you spend your time? Where can you automate? How do you keep costs in check? The questions seem endless, and the bigger the project, the more questions you'll have. To help guide you in setting up your data story project, we created this diagram from the projects we've worked on. Each circle in the diagram represents a part of the project, be it an activity, tool, or platform that serve a purpose. For example, team communications calls out the fact that your team needs to keep in contact throughout the project. You can, of course, choose different ways to do it, but the act of establishing and deploying a form of communications across you, your stakeholders, and your audience is important. Select a channel and stick with it throughout the project so your team has a predictable and consistent way to communicate with one another, send status and updates, ask questions, and so on. You'll also notice that each arrow that connects the circles has an action or activity tied to it. For example, add files means you may have a deliverable from one part of the project process that you'll want to upload, save, and share alongside other project files. These files could be UX journey maps, code, story conceptualization docs, draft articles, and so on. Build represents the code that you may need to write, build, and release, which you'd manage locally and within a cloud-based code repository. And notification means that there should be communication out to the team of the progress of the project for that item. For example, when you've completed and added a UX journey file to your code repository or document collaboration tool, then there should be communication, preferably automated, out to the team that this is done and available for use. Let's jump into each one of the elements of the process. Team communications should be the first item you address with your project. If it's just you, then it's picking an email or other channel to use to coordinate with your stakeholders or amongst your contacts and sources. However, if you have a team, then you'll want email and a more real-time tool like Slack or Teams. A good practice here is to pick the communication tool or tools and draft a short document or email with guidelines for use for those tools, and create a distribution list, or DL, that includes all of the project members and their contact info, access to the tools, a short FAQ on use, and so on. Also known as document management, it's important to keep your documents available and version controlled. Most of you likely work both locally and in a cloud-based or software as a service, or SaaS, environment. But wherever possible, be sure to select a tool where you can easily upload and share documents. Ideally, you have something with version control, or you create manual versions and have a protocol that the team understands. For example, filename_v1.doc, filename_v2.doc, etc. OneDrive and Google Drive are lower-cost options, whereas SharePoint with O365 have lots of features and cost a bit more. Also, you can select tools that have a workflow built into them. For example, SharePoint has a workflow that when you upload a document for review, a notification is automatically sent out to the review team. Predefined workflows are very helpful, such that you don't have to recreate the wheel for every project. You can also use a code repo for all of your files, which we'll discuss next. We always create a code repo for a project. Always. We use GitHub specifically and use private repos. This allows us to create a folder hierarchy specific to our project, share out the repo to the team, keep the repo secure, assign people specific roles, and commingle all types of files. For example, data, code, documents, HTML files, images, and so on. Your content platform may differ, depending on if you're writing an article, creating a video, designing an infographic, and so on. Each platform comes with its own content publish process, rules, and restrictions. For example, if you're writing an article on Medium or Ghost, these platforms have great features that easily integrate data that's published to DataWrapper or other web-based visualization tools. They also, though, have constraints, so be aware of the pros and cons before you choose a platform. Further, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram have a similar production workflow, but comes with a different set of platform constraints and considerations. Do your research and think through what is it that you want to do. Whatever platform you choose, you shouldn't let that platform get in your way. Choose the one that is the right price point for you, has the features that you want, and enables you to integrate that platform as the natural endpoint to your own data story project workflow. Also, be okay with growing out of tools as you grow as a content creator. When we first started out, we were okay with writing articles in Medium, and even explored Substack. But then we realized we needed multiple platforms to be cross-channel, and required more flexibility for visualization and analytics. You'll likely be at similar crossroads in your own journey. Your research tools will vary and are often distinct from your chosen platforms where you publish your content or tools you use to manage you and your team. That is, you're likely using Google, Google Scholar, OpenGov sites, ProQuest, JSTOR, first-party tools, and so on. You may be storing bookmarks or downloading documents to read later or share with the project team. You also may be taking notes while researching. You don't always find direct integration with research tools and other tools, at least within our diagram. For us, it's the links, notes, and downloaded documents that we want to make sure we upload into our document collaboration/management tools. We actively use OneNote as our note-taking tool, share PDFs, data files, and the like from research. Other tools, such as Notion, Evernote, and Trello, are also good. The key is to keep as much as you can in the cloud, secure and accessible, read-write, by the project team. We mentioned this above, but Note-taking and brainstorming is an important part of the project. We find that spending more time on getting your thoughts down on digital or actual paper, bringing in research and expertise into the brainstorming, and continually distilling the notes into a cohesive story is super valuable. It's where the story begins to shape itself. The process itself is messy, but embrace the chaos at this point. In fact, dive head-on into it. Again, tools like Notion, Miro, OneNote, and other SaaS-based tools are great for both creating that central digital whiteboard where you can both brainstorm, share ideas, and shape the data story. Some of these tools, for example Miro and Figma, also double as ways to create and share software or product artifacts, such as data model diagrams, UX journey maps, and so on. If you're conceptualizing your data story through a video or even a comic, you'll want to sketch out that story in some way. Storyboarding is something we do, regardless of whether the data story is a short business presentation or a larger video that carries a political message. Sketching out the journey can save you a ton of time later on. So again, spend the time sketching and shaping before you get into producing the content. We've used tools like Figma, Miro, and Balsamiq to create wireframes and UX mockups. We'd recommend something that has ease of use, can export your work into images or PDFs, so you can get these to the project team in your code repo or document collaboration/management environment, and offers you the best price point. The final section will offer some recommendations around how to keep it lean. It applies more to the solo journalist, content creator, and small independent teams. The first recommendation we'll share is creating a project overview document. Writing a few things out at the beginning of a project will get ideas and thoughts out of your head and written down. This is a good document to have before you get started with your research phase, and it doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to have structure and be useful. For a team, we'd recommend a more formal document that can be shared and reviewed. For a solo operator, a document, journal entry, or brainstorming notes would suffice. The goal here is to get some initial structure of the data story project written down. When creating the document, an ideal outline might be the following: description, goals, target audience, target platform or platforms, outcomes of the data story, deliverables, milestones, tools, metrics. You may think of more, but the above typically give you a good starting point, along with the ability to assess whether you can reasonably deliver against your milestones. The second recommendation is to create a common folder hierarchy for your data story projects. The process of creating an overview document should give some shape to the project, so the next step is to get a folder hierarchy created. The folder hierarchy will house the different parts of your project. For example, storyboards, data, analyses, and so on. For our projects, we use a folder structure like what's in the slide. You may find some deviations from this, but we found that this structure is common across our projects. Each folder may have different types of artifacts in it that different contributors on the team own. For example, the research folder will have a spreadsheet or doc with links in it, interesting research papers we want to share, and any notes we might make during this phase of the project. The data folder would have raw and original datasets, cleaned and transformed datasets, data that has features in it that can be modeled for predictive forecasts, and so on. After you've completed this process, you can move on to synchronizing these local folders with a document management/collaboration environment or a code repository. Also, creating a private code repository, unless you're creating an open source project for a community to use or to which they will contribute, in which case you might want to create a public repo. As we mentioned earlier, we always create a private repo for our projects. This is because you want to have a shared environment that you and/or your team can access and contribute to. You also want to have version control on your project artifacts. And you want to back up and store your project artifacts in a central, cloud-based way. And lastly, if you need to deliver all of the project artifacts to a customer as a final set of deliverables or for review, a code repo is an easy way to do this. We use GitHub as our code repository, which has a range of management tools available for you to use. If you've never used GitHub or source code before, you may want to spend some time learning about the fundamentals of GitHub and how you can use the commands. But after you have your folder hierarchy set up on your local folder, you can create a new private repo in GitHub and then synchronize it with your local folders. With a few commands or the use of GitHub Desktop, anytime you complete your work for the day, you can synchronize it, i.e. commit and push your work to your cloud-based GitHub repository. The last recommendation is automating your data pipeline. This one is a bit tougher because you may need to customize the data ingestion template for each data story project. So no one project is like the next when it comes to data. However, after you've created templates for 2 to 3 projects, you'll begin to see the repeatable parts of the ingestion, cleaning, and transformation process. Enough such that you can create a template that you can then customize for each subsequent data story project. A couple of considerations here are as follows. 1. If the source data is being updated regularly, having a data pipeline built and automated for the ingestion, cleaning, and transformation is important. You might see this for projects that are financial or market-oriented, where you need to have a pipeline for daily or weekly stock data or financial data. Automate as much as possible so you can focus on getting to a point of analytical consistency. 2. If you're doing an historical analysis, then the data is likely not going to change, so you may not need a lot of automation. The focus here would be more on the data discovery and analysis. We recommend thinking about scale and future reuse with every data story project you undertake. This translates into creating a data ingestion, cleaning, and transformation template that, with a few customizations for each project, gets you to your analysis more quickly.